Welcome to the Church Solutions Podcast, brought to you by JSL Solutions. The Church Solutions Podcast is designed to help equip you and your church in the use of technology and other tools and services. And now, here are your hosts, Steve Lacy and Phil Thompson.
And nice to be with you again. We are brought to you by JSL Solutions.
Hi, my name is Steve Lacy.
And I'm Phil Thompson, and JSL Solutions provides streaming video with streamingchurch.tv, also mobile apps with churchapplive.com, and also website templates and church management tools from the mothership, myflock.com.
That's right.
Yeah.
That is us. What are we doing today?
We are talking. So this is one of my pet peeves.
Oh, it is?
And,
good.
Yeah.
I like getting in on pet peeves.
It just drives me nuts. We're going to talk about common church management problems.
It's not smacking gum? That's not your pet peeve?
Well, your pet peeve is when I scratch the back of my throat when we're on Skype.
Yes.
But you noticed when I put a different microphone in last week, you didn't hear that anymore, did you?
I didn't.
See? But I won't. I could give people an example of that, but let's not.
So your pet peeve is management, not gum smacking or
chewing with your mouth open, you mean?
You know what my pet peeve is?
Yeah, what is it? No, I don't. Go ahead.
One of my pet peeves, I have many, but one is getting stuck behind someone trying to merge on the freeway doing 40 miles an hour.
Yeah.
When everyone's going 75.
Yeah.
That is just drives me crazy.
It's almost every time. I have the same. I deal with it all the time because I'm always getting on the interstate where I live. You know,
Yeah.
I have to almost always get on the interstate.
Yeah.
It is a problem.
And I had a good friend I worked with who was a little crazy, but he said something once that I thought made a lot of sense. He said, that was a pet peeve of his, and he had a motorcycle. He was going through a motorcycle phase.
I could see that.
A crotch rocket phase.
Yeah.
And he goes, I merge at about 90. I go, oh, really? He said, I figure I can slow down a lot faster than I can speed up. He goes, so it makes it a whole lot easier to merge on the freeway. And I was like, that's true. You can slow down a lot faster than you can speed up.
I would be, as a motorcycle rider, and I am one, I would be a little concerned about that, though, because if you're flying down the road on the bike and you have to hit your brakes, I don't know. That could get kind of ugly.
Well, you only have to go from 90 to 65 or something. You're not going
85 to 90.
It's not going crazy. And he just made the point. He said it's a lot harder to accelerate you're going to decelerate really fast. So when he had the opportunity, I was like, I kind of thought that does make a little bit of sense to me, but people think I'm crazy.
I've maintained that the people that cause the most accidents are not the fast drivers.
No,
it's the slow ones.
It's not necessarily slow one. It's the ones that aren't paying attention. It's the ones that are out and taking care of or their mind is somewhere else, and they're not. Yeah. Driving is a very passive thing, and then they go I think that's where most of the accidents. I think one of the most common accidents, we're really getting off topic here,
yes,
is when you're at a stop sign and the person in front of you starts to take off and you look away or look to the right and they have stopped in front of you.
Oh, so you're like they're making a right turn.
They're like making a right turn and they take off.
Basically right on red.
Yeah, and you think they're gone and going, and so you look away and you roll into them at 5 miles an hour.
I've had that happen. Yeah, it's
common. Anyway, and that's just not quite paying attention. Okay, what are we talking about today?
So now that we've
your pet peeve,
4 minutes, So I really would implore everybody to listen to this, especially if you're a pastor. And this may not be your forte, but you really should at least consider some of the things we're going to talk about. And that's the common church mismanagement problems. And Rich Sider, who is a church consultant, gives 5 common management problems that usually result in the confusion and conflict. And somebody that has been, I was operations manager for radio stations for a long time, and then executive pastor, which is basically management for churches. I was a senior pastor for about 8 years, and I'm kind of back in as a part-time role for a small church as an executive pastor. And I'm telling you, these problems can come back to bite you, and they can cause a lot of problems in your church and limit your growth and create just conflict and gossip and all sorts of stuff. So that's why we're talking about that today. And yeah, I mean, the priority of most people listening to this, especially if you're a pastor, is, hey, we want to minister to our members and our communities. We want to reach people. And so a lot of times there's not a lot of priority on how things are managed and how systems are put into place in the church organization. But again, you really need to recognize some of these issues and address them, because they can lead to better things if they're fixed. If they're not, then you can get stuck.
All right.
Clear enough?
So we have the top 5, according to Exciter, management problems that happen in.
Yeah. So let's jump into it.
All right.
We're halfway through the podcast.
So,
yeah. All right. So the first one.
Let's talk about traffic.
Yeah, we definitely have it here in Tucson, but it's getting better now that the snowbirds are gone. But again, we have digressed. So the first one is lack of clear lines of responsibility and accountability. So, again, you have church staff. And church staff, of course, a common joke is they have as many bosses as they have members. But and that's probably an exaggeration, but you can run into some issues here where you have leadership teams and different groups within the church trying to do things, trying to do ministry, and you have staff. And so you a lot of times will run into some issues of who's responsible for what and the accountability that goes with all those things, and it can create quite a mess. So the bottom line is that you want to have some structure here, some kind of infrastructure that kind of governs your authority of what you can do as a staff, what board people can do, what leadership team people can do, people involved as volunteers. And if you can communicate that and communicate their responsibility effectively, then that division kind of begins to becomes minimal.
Right.
Are you with me on that?
Yeah, there's a couple of aspects to this. There's, we're talking about lack of clear lines of responsibility and accountability. So there's a thing that starts to fall apart within the staff members if that's not really clearly delineated, and then people make assumptions about, why does Mary have Joe doing that when I think I should be the one doing that, and so it creates all this strife and problems just interpersonally or within your group, as well as may or may not have the right people getting, that have the right skills for the right thing. So not having a clear delineation of who's responsible for what, and that's going to feed into your training programs for what, okay, we're going to have Susie is going to take this training course because that's her neck of the woods.
Sure.
And so, there's all kinds of issues that not just the confusion and things not getting done, but it can become a very emotional conflict thing with people.
And again, I realize that some people listening to this podcast like, I don't care about that stuff. Well, you really should. I know you care about the people and ministering to people and reaching your community, but this is where somebody that has some management experience could help out. Even if you're a small church and you don't have an executive pastor, maybe you've got somebody that's in your church that has done some management. Because honestly, I think management stuff, for the most part, goes across the lines. I mean, I was in radio station management for years, and I brought a lot of the same principles that I used in secular. Well, actually, I was in Christian broadcasting, but in a business that wasn't church, I brought it over to church and improved what was going on, because there's just principles that if you understand those things and can implement those things, even if they're not perfect, will make a big difference. That's all I'm trying to say here. So get some clear lines of responsibility and some accountability.
And I have seen areas where this has gone overboard.
It can.
The point where, especially in my past careers, there was areas where, things were just way overboard on this. Like, no, that's my job. I get to carry your box from here to there. And
that's not what we're talking about.
Right.
But you can always go to extreme on everything.
Right.
All I'm saying is I've been with a number of churches over the years, covering like 4 decades. And this is a weakness. What we're talking about today is a weakness in many churches, especially the smaller ones. It can be a problem in big churches too, but normally if they can fix these things first, then it will allow you to grow and be more effective. So let's move on, because it gets better here.
So number 2.
Poor continuity in your leadership. And so when I say poor continuity here, we're not just talking the pastor and the staff. We're also talking about your leadership team, your lay leadership. If you want to call them board members, you can do that. Some people call them leadership teams. So there can be so many people going in and out, particularly the board usually. And that can create a problem if, again, the vision and the clear understanding is not communicated. And normally what most board people have is they have people serve maybe 3 years, and then they take a year off perhaps, and then they come back if you want them back, or if they want to come back. But what's good to do is stagger those things. So you don't have 3 or 4 people leaving, depending on how large your board is. Right. You don't have a bunch of people leaving, and then you got a bunch of new people coming in, and you almost, in some ways, have to reinvent the wheel because there hasn't been effective communication on their vision, the mission, and what they're supposed to do.
And I've not had a lot of experience in this issue because I've been with the same church forever, and it seems like I've had the same people. Yeah, that can be common. So we haven't suffered from a problem with poor continuity of leadership that I've been exposed to.
Yeah, I would say, working with your church that I did for a number of years, that's probably true. Plus, your leadership team was structured maybe a little differently than some churches structure theirs, and we'll get into that in just a moment, because there's different structures and there's different ways people set up their boards, so to speak, and all that stuff. But the bottom line is, you might consider a longer, if your leadership team or board has kind of short term, you might want to consider lengthening that a little bit. Or at least stagger it so you don't have a bunch of people going off at the same time, and you can kind of work it so that it's not a huge deal.
All right. Number 3 on our list is unwillingness to delegate and trust.
Unwillingness, so again, this is a problem in churches. People are humans, and humans have issues, insecurities, fears, and whatever, and so. What a lot of times happens, and I've experienced this the last 5 years especially, is that sometimes it's hard for the church boards to stay focused on the big picture. And so the big picture being, of course, your mission, your church's vision, your church's goals. And sometimes what's happening, what I've seen happen, is there can be a micromanaging, there can be, again, some boundary issues where different board people start getting involved in things they really shouldn't be involved in. So there's a model that my church uses, and your church uses, I think, a version of this. It's called the Carver Model. And it's just a model that defines boundaries within board members and, your staff people. And what I found is that if you can continually reinforce those, every so often, it keeps everybody in track. You're smiling. Why is this?
I think when we adopted the Carver thing, I was actually on the board at the time, and they said, we're going to take on this Carver model. We need everybody to read this book.
Oh,
and so the book was like 4,000 pages long or something like that. And it was the driest thing I had ever read. And I was a little upset because when we came back to, before the next board meeting next month, make sure you've read through, chapters 1 through 19. And so I did. And I came back and I was the only one.
Yeah.
Everyone was, too busy. And I was like, ooh, and it was so painful, man. But anyway.
Well, the Carver model, I think, from my experience, is a good model.
It probably is a good model. It doesn't make a good book.
It's probably not the best reading material. But it's basically just delegating and understanding the roles. And for instance, at my church, and yours is, I think, the same way, the staff does the day-to-day operations. The staff makes day-to-day decisions with operations, and the leadership team is kind of holds us accountable with our budget and holds us accountable to our vision? Are the decisions that the staff is making, is that consistent with our mission and our values and our,
Right. And what I had seen being, I've not been a part of a church staff, but I have been a part of a church board.
Right.
And I have seen the tendency for the board to start trying to micromanage some of the stuff that the staff should be doing. So that the focus is, let's point the ship from a board direction rather than let's try to figure out how to get Susie's discipline action in place or, whatever.
When I, again, came on where I'm at now part-time in a part-time role, I was explaining, we're using a Carver Model. Oh, great. So I came on and it was like nothing. It's like it was nothing at all close to the Carver Model. They were just micromanaging. In fact, I was in this heated discussion and one of the board members looked at me and said, "Do you think we're micromanaging?" I said, "Yeah, actually, I think you do." And then one of the other guys, "Oh, no." So it was just a mess. And I basically said, I told the senior pastor who wasn't there at the time, I said, "Look, if this is the way you guys run your boards, I'm not coming anymore. Sorry." And we eventually fixed it. All we did was just redefine what the roles were. And we went over that usually a couple times a year. And there's some other things that we would have in our agenda that kind of point people to that. So for the most part, we stayed on track, but you have to make those things clear. Otherwise, people will just get off track and then you start having issues.
All right. So number 4 on our list here.
Number 4, as we move on here, is lack of strong policies and procedures that are communicated and followed. Now, again, this sounds kind of dry. We'll get to the good stuff here in a moment. So, look, this is most of the people listening that are in ministry could care less about this. They just want to get people saved. They want to help people reach God. They want to help people grow spiritually. But you really do need to have some type of policies, some type of procedures clearly defined in some way so that not just the staff, not just the board, but also the congregation has a good understanding of how things are done and why things are done a certain way. And again, if you're not one of those people, you should find somebody that can work with you, understand your vision and values, and help define this stuff.
So I have a question for you that I don't know the answer for is, I can see, I've been part of primarily non-denominational churches and some denominational churches, and the denominational churches I've been a part of, it seemed like they had a little more of this in place than the non-denominational.
Yeah,
so I assume that, so if you're part of a denominational church, they're going to come with these things and say, here's how we operate, here's our procedures and policies, and paragraph 4, section 1 says this guy should do that.
Yeah, and I've been a part of for the most part, non-denominational movement for years. But when I was in Kansas as a senior pastor, I found myself in a small community with a bunch of denominational churches and pastors, and we were on this ministerial association, and it really opened my eyes to what they had to deal with compared to me that was starting a church. And
so they're coming from, oh my gosh, you got these policies and procedures I got to follow.
Yeah, they didn't, but and the reason they have a lot of that is because somebody years ago in a certain denomination decided, we really should have some of this stuff. It would be helpful, and then that's probably why you might see more denominational churches have more structure because of their history, because of they've been around for a while, versus some of us fly by night. I'm sorry, fly by the seat of our pants. That's not really what I'm trying to infer here. But when you're non-denominational,
so you're saying non-denominational churches fly by the seat of their pants?
Some of them do, but sometimes. There's a freedom sometimes, which is, again, this is a whole nother podcast for another time in another's program. But, sometimes as a non-denominational pastor, you have a little more freedom to do things. And there's lots of things, there's pros and cons to both, to be honest with you. There really are pros and cons to both.
So this is again, Rick Snyder's list of the top 5.
Yeah, which I would agree with.
Yeah. So a lack of strong policies and procedures. So number 5.
So here's where we get into a little bit more of the meat of the podcast, and that would be poor administrative systems that don't constantly deliver basic products and services. Now, that sounds like a secular sales thing, but the truth is it applies to ministry. It applies to church. So every church has a few basic administrative systems in place, or should, and you probably have something in place, even if it's not the best thing in the world, that will help your members get focused on your mission and your vision. Hopefully you have something.
All right. So what are examples of some of these things?
All right. So examples would be, your systems of your finances. So, how are your donations? How's your banking? Who pays the bills? How do the bills get paid? The payroll. Who handles your payroll? Who handles the financial reporting? Those kind of things. Those are systems that that's one of the systems, your financial system. And look, this is very important. People are giving their money to you. So you need to be accountable, and you need to have it together on how things are done, and they need to be done appropriately. That's one area. Another area that some churches have and some don't is membership. Most have membership, some don't have membership, but
yeah. I've interfaced with some churches that I'm like very surprised they have no system in place over membership.
Yeah. And they're probably non-denominationals, right? Not to pick on the non-denominational people, but
with communicating with your members and tracking your members and getting your members organized. I mean, some of these things are going to tie together. We talk about groups, how you track the membership and what members are a part of what group, and how I communicate with these people and track visitors, follow up with visitors, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, and again, I'm going back to the same thing I've mentioned several times. There may be the average pastor listening to this might not be interested in some of this stuff, but you should be at least interested enough, especially in these next few things we're talking about here, finances and membership. Are you really reaching people? Are you connecting with people? Are you meeting their needs? Well, if you have a good membership tracking program, some kind of a system, you should be able to have the answers to that. Now, this is getting into the area of administration, obviously, which is hard for some people. But again, if you can't afford to have an executive pastor or some kind of a director, find somebody that could volunteer.
Typically the one that's kind of over making sure this is all happening right.
Yeah, it's really necessary. The other one is groups within groups within your congregation. So, hopefully you have people involved in your church that are in part of different areas, small groups, cell groups, different outreach groups. Maybe you're reaching people with, helping, the Gospel Rescue Mission, or helping those less fortunate. You have different areas of ministry that you're doing, and, who's managing those, and how is that being, accounted for as far as, what's this group doing? What's this group doing? How else are you going to know? So again, if you're weak in certain areas and you're monitoring these kind of things, you can improve them. But if you don't know, how many people did we send to to help feed the poor, last week? Well, we don't remember. We had 2, maybe we had 5. It just it's a numbers game.
So the next in this subcategory is facilities.
Yeah.
So that's who's responsible for maintenance.
Right.
I think a pretty common thing is that people don't manage well is long-term maintenance issues.
Yeah, that's true.
We've had this AC unit for 27 years now. Yep. And
we're surprised that it quit working.
Yeah.
Why did it quit?
Yeah.
Why we haven't serviced it for 20 years?
Yeah. And that's going to feed into how I budget things. Yep. So I need to, long-term facilities maintenance things. Say, hey, one of these days that AC unit's going to go out and we're going to need $20,000.
Yeah. And it's going to go out when it's Sunday morning and it's 95 degrees outside and humid.
Yeah. So let's.
I just spent $500 a couple of weeks ago with, the AC guy serviced. We had 6 units. The AC guys serviced them, charged me $500. But hey, I'd rather pay the $500. I've got it budgeted. Then come some Sunday morning here in Tucson, Arizona, and it's hot outside and the AC's not working. So facilities, who does that? Who handles that?
So and then next is staff and. Kind of somewhat talk this through, right? Yeah. Making sure you have a personnel manual and how things are going to work, policies and that sort of thing.
And again, this is not real attractive to some people, but you really should have a policy manual, or you at least should have a very clear job description, and you should be, whoever the staff is reporting to, that needs to be a consistent thing, how often you do it or whatever, to make sure these people are fulfilling their job description. How are they doing? Are they improving?
Right.
Are they getting worse?
And if I've got a larger ministry, a lot of times I'm going to have somebody that their full-time job is finance, and another one's just membership, and another one's facilities. And
yeah.
So,
And here's the last one that's important.
Which is what?
Communication.
That's not important.
Communication. So, again, who's communicating, and, you could tie social media into this as well. Communication about what's happening with the church, all the different areas that you use, your newsletter, your program, social media. And by the way, what and how decisions are being made, and who's doing this.
I saw a really good thing it was a much larger ministry, but I think every ministry needs to do this, and that was basically putting together a style guide for communication for the church. So there was, it was like, hey, these are our team colors, these are our team fonts, and
your brand,
and kind of your brand colors, your brand fonts, and so everything that we go out is going to go out in Helvetica 12 point or whatever it is, and it becomes and it's something easy to
Consistency.
do is just establish what's going to be what's our communication is going to look like, and you just they actually wrote a style guide that just basically said, okay, here's the colors, here's the fonts, here's the image galleries are going to come from here, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And especially now, especially with social media too, you can carry this into social media because, if you've got 2 or 3 people posting on your Facebook page, your church's Facebook page, and they've got a whole different idea on what they should be posting, the type of content they should be posting.
Yeah. Even the voice of the communication needs to be kind of
coordinated.
Yeah.
And again, this stuff, it takes time to do some of this. It's challenging.
It's not that hard, though, right?
But once you get it in place, you can always tweak it a little bit. But you can keep going with it, and you can make changes with it as time goes on and modify it some. But you've got to have something.
Yeah, and it's going to overall just kind of raise the level of professionalism of your organization. If you take into account these things, some of the, like you said, it's going to run smoother, it's going to look better. It's going to be less conflict, a little more efficient.
And the bottom line is, when you have less conflict and you don't have some of these management problems, when people walk into your church, and again, I'm getting back to new people coming into your church, it's kind of weird, but they can kind of sense a vibe sometimes. If there's problems within the church and people are bickering, they can kind of pick up on that vibe. And if you've got things going smooth because you've put some of these things we talked about in place, you'll get new people that will embrace what you're doing. They'll be a part of your church. Your church will grow. You'll reach more people, and life can be good as opposed to such a struggle because we got too many cooks in the kitchen, and this guy's doing this and he shouldn't be doing that. And anyhow, all right. So
they're getting on the freeway going too slow,
or they're going too slow when they get on the freeway. We can put that in the manual. All right, so we're done here, but we'd love to get your feedback on this. As always, send us an email, support@streamingchurch.tv. And, you can always find this Church Solutions podcast on iTunes. You can find it on any podcast provider should have us. Just do a search, subscribe to it. You'll never miss us. We're on YouTube as well, but, check us out and share it with a friend. All right, so we're done, right?
We are done.
Good enough. All right, we'll talk about traffic next week, and I can concur with you on some of that. But anyhow, he is Steve Lacy. I am Phil Thompson. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today on the Church Solutions podcast. Have a great day. We will catch you next time.